This is Grant Luna with Fidelity National Title, and in this video I'll be showing you how to use Fidelity Agent 1's new compensation calculator. So to get started, you'll press calculators at the bottom of the screen and you'll look for compensation calculator. If you don't see it, you may need to scroll down a little bit. And also a quick tip, you can rearrange these calculators in your app. So if you hold down one of these calculators, you can drag it anywhere within the app itself. Once you click on compensation calculator, you'll be brought into the compensation calculator itself. So you'll just need some basic input for this calculator, such as a home price. You can also change things like the loan type, the down payment percentage, the interest rate, the term of the loan, as well as the buyer agent compensation percentage, as well as who's paying it. So for example, the buyer, seller, or split. And lastly, you can change some other details of the calculator by pressing assumptions, so things like the HOA amount if needed. So I'll just enter in a house price, so I'll put in $950,000 and hit compute. So once you enter that information and hit compute, you'll be taken to the results of the calculator. So just to quickly show you the results of this calculator, what it's first showing are example cases where one of the parties, either the buyer or seller, is paying 100% of the compensation. So the first example case is the buyer agent being paid by the buyer itself. And so we see the breakdown of that offer situation for the buyer client, specifically showing things like the monthly payment amount as well as the bring to close amount, which includes the compensation cost. So here we see the buyer agreement at a 3% commission where the buyer is paying $28,500 at closing as a part of the closing cost. From here, you can click next option. This will show now the seller paying the buyer agent compensation. So we see once again the buyer agreement of 3%, but now the buyer paying $0 of that compensation. And we can also see that in the reduction in the bring to close amount at the bottom right, which has now been reduced by $28,500, which is now being paid by the seller. We can click next option again, and now we see a situation where the buyer is once again paying the compensation, but now it's being rolled into the loan itself. So we see an increase in the price of that property now at $981,000. So the buyer is getting a little bit higher of a loan. And we can see that actually in the monthly payment, which has now gone up by $234 a month, and the buyer agent being paid by this buyer through this loan itself. And we see the slight reduction in the closing cost as well, now that this compensation is being paid as a part of the loan. You can also click 50% at the top of the screen and see situations where the buyer agent compensation is being split between the buyer and the seller. So the first example is the buyer agent compensation being split between the buyer and seller. So once again, we'll see a slight reduction in the bring to close amount for this example case, as now the buyer is paying half of the compensation for the buyer agent. So their closing costs go down slightly. We even say the amount that they're paying, so $14,250. We see once again another example case where the buyer is rolling the portion of their buyer agent compensation into their loan. So they're paying a little bit over the list price now at $966,500, paying $0 at closing, but once again, we're going to have a slightly higher monthly payment and slightly reduced bring to close amount, as now they're just paying the compensation through the actual loan itself. So to create a nice template using this, you'll click the share button at the top right of the screen. And from here, you'll have a nice template with all of those scenarios laid out for you. You can easily share this with your client by clicking the share button at the top right of the screen and text, email, or bring it to your next buyer representative presentation. One other quick feature with this calculator is the fact that you can actually toggle whether you're showing all the example cases where it's 100% from one party or another, or 50%. So for example, by default, it's going to show all those example cases, but you can click 50% at the top of the screen. That will reduce and remove those example cases of where parties are paying 50%.